The day the desert tried to swallow Eli Turner whole, the sky burned white, and the rocks burned red, and the air itself burned like a brand pressed to the lungs. He had been walking the dry spine of a wash for hours, his canteen almost weightless against his belt, when the old habit returned, the one where he counted heartbeats to keep his mind off whiskey. He counted to 19, felt the familiar ache tug behind his ribs, and started over. Sometimes the numbers worked. Sometimes they didn't. Today they kept his boots moving. Ahead, the wash narrowed into a cleft of sandstone where heat pooled like a fever. He ducked into the shadow and let his eyes sharpen. 3 men had crossed here not long ago. The heel dig of a man who favored his right leg. The small V-cut of a pigeon-toed rider. The long, deliberate stride of someone who believed he had time on his side. Eli crouched, brushed his fingers along a scuffed rock, and put the story together. Bounty men. Not clumsy, not drunk. The careful kind. The kind who liked to set a table before they ate. Someone else had come through 2 lighter steps, not in a hurry, feet placed on stone rather than sand whenever possible. Someone who knew how to travel without leaving much of herself behind. He studied the faint impression at the toe of one print, and saw the ghost of a bead pressed into dust. Beads meant thread, thread meant leather meant buckskin. He squinted toward the cleft's far end, and saw nothing but the shimmer that the sun draws when it is bored, and looking for a game to play with a man's sight. He slipped the coil of rope higher on his hip and eased forward, Colt tucked but ready mind, counting again 1 to 19, 1 to 19. The first shot cracked the air, a heartbeat before the second, and both came from his left high on the wall where heat tried to hide shapes with light. He rolled behind a broken shelf of stone as chips spat across his cheekbone. The laughter that followed was flat and mean. That the sober man I heard about, a voice called, "Thought the desert took you back, Turner." Eli knew the voice before the name arrived, the way a body knows the rain before it falls. Mason Whitfield, once of Company B, once his commanding sergeant, now a man who had learned to sell anything that came into his hands, even lives. Eli set his jaw so the old anger had bones to grind on instead of his resolve. "Mason," he said loud enough to carry you, "never were patient. You still ain't. Patient enough to box you," Whitfield said, and the third shot punched a splinter from the rock, a finger's width from Eli's ear. The answer came from a direction no one expected. A knife struck the sandstone above Whitfield's perch and stuck there, a dragonfly of gleaming steel, vibrating in the heat. Someone moved in the mirage. A woman, dark braid buckskin shirt, stained along one side, face calm except for the wicked focus in her eyes. "Down," she said, English bent by another language's bones. Eli went down. 2 more shots snapped past where his head had been. "Wrong canyon," the woman said, as she slid beside him, already drawing a second knife with the casualness of someone reaching for a spoon. "Wrong men. Wrong day to stand." "Seems I drew the same lot," Eli said, peering around the rock. "How many with him?" 3, and the one who thinks he is a snake. She pointed with her chin mouth twitching. "Your rope. I thought it was a rattler." "My mistake." He glanced at the coil at his hip and almost laughed, despite the bullets. Despite the old voice on the cliff. Despite the taste of copper in his mouth. "Far as I know," he said, "it only bites when I throw it bad." "Then bite back," she said, and rose in a smooth, unhurried drift that made mockery of the gunfire. Her knife flew and bloomed in a forearm where a muzzle flashed, turned that shot into a yelp and a clatter. Eli fired once, twice, his shots placed, where breath turns to panic and the canyon changed shape, less murderous, more uncertain. Whitfield swore. "Bring me the woman," he snarled, and cut Turner down to his sobriety coin. "You'll be needing new men," the woman said, so quietly the canyon almost kept it. To Eli, she added this way. They moved into a crease the color of old blood, where water had once carved a memory. The woman led as if the stone itself had told her its secrets. They climbed until the canyon's mouth was a slit that let in only the cruelest light. When they finally crouched beneath an overhang that smelled of bat and dust, she sank to one knee and pressed her hand to her side. When she drew it away, her palm shone wet. Grazed, Eli asked. "When the wind is stubborn," she said, considering the blood as if it were a map. "Yes, the wind will learn." Eli shrugged off his bandana clean, as things get in country like this, and bound the wound. His hands steady the way they had learned to be when everything else had wanted to shake apart. "Name's Eli," he said. Eli Turner. I am called Raven, she said. Some say I should not be called at all. Some say a lot of things when they're paid to. He said, thinking of Whitfield, thinking of the men below, thinking of a whiskey bottle asleep and waiting in a saloon somewhere to wake and do him harm. You got men hunting you, or the idea of you. Men hunt the map they think I carry, Raven, said, the corner of her mouth drifting towards something like a smile and then abandoning it. But they cannot read what they want. What is it they want to read, Eli asked. Silver, she said, and then no. Water that pretends to be silver. When the sky forgets rain, a river remembers. My father remembered where. Eli let the thought settle. In country like this, water was worth more than pistols or gold, or the pretense of either. Whitfield don't care what the map says, long as he can sell it 3 times before noon. Then do not let him hold it, Raven said simply, as if she had asked him to hold a door and not a future. I've got a friend 2 ridges over, Eli said after a beat. Runs a mission that ain't a mission no more. Place to stitch wounds and think. Men who remember how to stand. We can make the ridge by night if the wind quits arguing. Raven studied him, not his words. Him. You have not had whiskey in long time, she said at last. Your mouth is thirsty in other ways. 3 years, he said, and that truth felt like laying a rifle across his knees and bearing the stock to the sun. 3 years and counting. Good, she said. Drunk men shoot the ground. Below, Whitfield's voice rose again, ugly and impatient. We'll smoke you out, he promised the rock. We'll make a little fire and cook your courage down to bones. We used to say that to men who didn't deserve it, Eli murmured. And now, Raven asked. Now I save the fire for the dark, Eli said, and he put his hand to the stone and began to climb. They went when the canyon's breath shifted. Raven moved first quiet as Dusk and Eli followed, counting heartbeats and footholds, making a prayer with numbers he didn't believe in, but needed. By the time Whitfield's men realized their quarry had unthreaded the trap, the desert had already taken Eli and Raven into its wide, hard mouth. They traveled west, by the way. East is sometimes kinder, crossing under shadow lines, cutting toward a broken column of black rock, shaped like a priest's finger, avoiding the places where dust layers ambush for lungs. Raven's fever found them when the light bled copper. She leaned too heavy in her saddle, and Eli knew the bullet's kiss had been meaner than she let on. Hold on, he said, and gave her the last of his water, then lied without mercy. River's 2 miles. We'll give the stars our feet if we must. She watched him for a beat with eyes that weighed lies and chose their uses. The stars know your feet already, she said, and let him tie her to the saddle horn with his rope, the knot snake that might yet bite the day for them both. The mission was a silhouette when the night finally cooled. Adobe bones, a bell with no tongue, a wooden cross that had traded prayer for sky watching. Eli led them under the sagging lintel and into a room that smelled of time and old smoke. A counter scraped. A lamp flared. A tall man with silver hair and surgeon's hands lifted a shotgun in welcome, and then lowered it in recognition. Eli Turner, he said, I hoped you'd be smart enough to be dead by now. Doc Santiago, Eli said, exhaling something like relief for the first time that day. I brought you a friend who needs your meanness. I have meanness to spare, Santiago said, already crossing the room, already seeing the wound, already washing his hands in a bowl that made the water look like coins. Lay her down. And Turner, if that man hunting you is Mason Whitfield, tell me soon because my temper is old and prefers warning. It's him, Eli said. Good, Santiago said without smiling. Good. They said about the work that keeps people in this world and out of the next. Santiago's needle argued with Raven's skin and won stitch by stubborn stitch. Eli fetched clean cloth, tore it, and counted his breaths until 19 over and over, while the old ghost paced the mission's long shadows. When Raven shivered, he held her shoulder and felt the heat like a stove banked but not safe. The storm of the day had spent itself, but the night carried another kind of weather. Whitfield won't give up, Eli said when the bleeding slowed and the bandage held. He never learned how. Then we'll teach him endings, Santiago said, rinsing his hands. He nodded to a corner where a trunk waited iron-banded and patient. You remember what we keep for hard lessons? I remember, Eli said, thinking of rifles that still held an oath. Raven's eyes slid open slow as dawn. She looked to the ceiling, to the cracked plaster map of a saint long gone, then to Eli. You ran, she said. I climbed, he corrected. I only run toward something these days. Toward what? He did not answer yet, because a man should be sure before he names the thing he will carry. Outside, a coyote sang an old complaint to the stars. Inside, the mission breathed with three people who had made choices that would not turn back. And in the dark beyond the bell with no voice, Whitfield's men watered their horses and made promises that the morning would make them regret. The night crawled. Santiago slept in a chair like a man who has trained his bones to bargain with wood. Raven dreamed in a language the room could not hold. Eli sat near the door with his colt in his lap and his rope coiled by his boot, and counted himself sober every time the shadows stretched their hands and found nothing to grip. By gray light, a rider came dust, shy, yet steady. Eli stood before the knock. Santiago opened. A woman in a rough duster stepped in, smiled in a way that put courage into the room like coffee. "Name's May Duval," she said to Eli. "Heard you finally decided to stop being a ghost. Never was good at haunting," he said. "Good," she said. "Ghosts can't shoot." She set a folded paper on the table. On it, the outline of three canyons like fingers and a mark, where the ground remembered water. Raven's gaze sharpened. "Who gave you this?" she asked. "A man I trusted once," Mick said, "and buried twice. He said to find you, Raven, said the river under stone is waking, and men who don't love it mean to chain it." Raven looked to Eli, and in that look was a whole year of choices telescoped into a heartbeat. "We do not let them," she said. The bell without a tongue hung silent and black against the pale morning. To anyone standing in the yard, the mission might have looked like an empty thing, but inside, three people and a map and a coil of rope and a sober man's resolve were more than enough to change the day's shape. They began to plan the way poor men plan, with better questions than coin, with stubbornness, with love they did not mention, because saying it aloud might make it reckless, with mistrust for hope, and mercy for nothing except the wounded and the truth. And when the sun finally cleared the far ridge, they stepped out into it together, eyes narrowed not against the light, but against the future's glare, which is a different kind of bright entirely. They saw Whitfield's riders, then a blunt line of dust, and the mission's yard became a page where three hands wrote in gunpowder and courage. Raven shifted her weight and found the place where the bandage ended and her strength began. Santiago lifted a rifle like a benediction. Eli tucked his colt close and set the rope across his shoulder where some might have worn a sash. Whitfield raised his hand and shouted, and the first shots of the day tore the quiet in two. What happened afterward did not belong to luck. It belonged to the work of people who had decided their lives would not be traded and their water would not be sold. And though the story rolled forward into heat and smoke and the hard arithmetic of who stood and who fell, it also held room for the smallest measure of grace. The way Raven, even bleeding, found time to laugh, when Eli's rope thrown true took a gun hand right at the wrist. The way Santiago, old and mean, said a prayer for men he disliked simply because they were dying. The way May, flanking, whispered to her horse as if he too deserved an apology for what men do to keep other men from making the world worse. The desert watched the day the way deserts do, without pity, without malice, with a patience that could kill or save. By noon the dust had learned new shapes, and the bell without a tongue rang in the minds of those who survived its silence, saying the thing bells say best remember. And still beneath stone somewhere, west a river threaded its way forward silver, when the light touched it, older than greed, young as mercy. It waited for feet and hooves and choices. It waited for three people who did not have much, and for that reason had everything they needed. The first volley scratched the mission walls and chewed at the yard, as if the bullets were starving dogs let off their chains at dawn. Eli felt the old training rise up from places he no longer visited, that cold clockwork that counts angles and distances, while the heart is still remembering to be brave. He did not fight the feeling or shame it. He let it do its work the same way he let the desert sun do its work, relentless and honest. Santiago called wind and measure under his breath and placed his shots with a surgeon's cruelty, cutting tendons of the charge, rather than meat forcing riders to wheel away, with reins yanked and curses bitten in half. Raven knelt where the shadow of the bell fell and steadied her breathing until the fever in her blood agreed to wait its turn. She did not shoot yet. She watched. She weighed. She learned the rhythm of the enemy and did not allow their anger to become the rhythm of her own hands. May rode the flank low and tight, her horse answering to knees and whispers more than leather. She slid to cover behind a broken trough as two riders pressed the left and dropped one, with a round to the elbow, that turned his aim upside down. The second thought he could break the yard by will alone, and came at a dead run. May stood when he was too close to think and took his hat with a shot that cut the air above his skull, not to miss but to claim his attention. And when he flinched, she hooked his boot with her stirrup and made the ground remind him what it felt like to be a boy, without a horse and too much pride. Whitfield held back at first, letting other men spend their nerve. He had always been good at that, at buying time with someone else's breath. He watched the yard through the heat and spit a little dust to clear the taste of his own name from his mouth. When he finally raised his hand and pushed forward, he did it with the confidence of a card sheet who knows the deck is marked. He believed the mission would fold under the weight of numbers, because numbers had never betrayed him the way men had. He did not account for the way the yard itself seemed to lean toward the defenders, for the ways old places remember old vows. Eli felt the line thin to a thread and then tighten. He left the doorway and crossed the open in 4 long strides that ignored the hiss of lead around his knees. He took a post by the bell and set the rope across his palm, the same rope Raven had mistaken for a rattler in the canyon. He breathed once and twice and swung it once and caught a wrist that rose where a gun rose, pulled hard, and felt the shape of a life change in his hand. He dragged the man from the saddle and let the sand instruct him. Another rider came on with a pistol, already speaking violence. Eli did not speak back with his Colt yet. He threw again and looped the man's reins, yanked the muzzle to the sky, so the shot went into a cloud that did not care, then sent a round into the post beside the horse so the animal learned to turn without asking why. Raven waited until she saw Whitfield move. She was not looking for his face. She was watching for his posture, for the way the shoulders of a leader change when he decides men are numbers again. When she saw it, she rose and took her first shot of the morning, and the man to Whitfield's right learned that a knife can fly on the breath of patience as well as anger. She moved before the knife landed, not to hide the throw, but to draw a second line of fire. Bullets came hot to where she had been and found nothing worth dying for. Her second knife clipped a carbine from a shoulder and bought Santiago time to slice a horse's mane with a near miss that read as warning to the rider and as opportunity to May, who closed the distance and made the saddle empty. The fight was not a song. It was a ledger balanced with sweat and dust and the ugly arithmetic of necessity. By mid-morning, the yard was scored with hoofprints and footprints and the long commas of bodies who would not stand again. Eli felt his right shoulder go numb, then hot, then nothing at all, a graze that meant to be worse and failed. He took it as a reminder that the day did not belong to him alone. He began to count again. Not heartbeats this time, but men who would never go home because they had chosen a man like Whitfield to carry their purpose. He did not let the sorrow slow his hands. Whitfield pressed once more as if stubbornness could make a truth different. He nearly broke them then, when 2 of his best found the right angle and the right speed, and the right kind of meanness to push through the yard's careful defenses. Eli went forward to meet them, and Santiago moved to cover Eli, and in that breath Raven saw the thin place where the yard might tear. She stood into the fever as if it were a river, and walked into the open with a calm that did not belong to human form. She raised both hands so all could see. She held no pistol and called Whitfield by name, in a voice that traveled farther than bullets because it carried a promise. She said, "Mason Whitfield, you have mistaken the shape of water and the weight of names." She said, "You are fighting thirst with powder, and thirst does not scare." She said, "Turn around and live today, or step forward and hold your own death like a cup you thought held whiskey." Then she fell silent, and the yard held its breath because even the men who had not come for wisdom knew they had been given some. Whitfield laughed, but he did not laugh well. He fired. The shot tore a chip from the bell above Raven's head and sent a soundless note through the metal that all of them felt in their teeth. Eli fired back, and the day let go of the breath it had been holding. Whitfield's hat jumped and a scar appeared along his temple like a white path cut through dark brush. He staggered but did not fall. He put his hand to the line of pain and looked at the blood and looked at Raven, and something old and bad inside him made an oath it could not keep. The push failed. Not all at once and not with spectacle. It unraveled like rope left in weather. The last of the riders peeled away, not because they had been beaten in the way men brag about, but because they had learned there was no price they could pay that would purchase the thing they had been promised. The yard sagged into silence, broken only by the small sounds Santiago made when he walked among the fallen with his jaw set to the hard work of tending what could be tended and naming what could not. May kicked dust from her boots and spat and said, "We bought morning. We did not buy afternoon." Eli nodded and said, "The yard is not a house, and a house is not a home, and a home does not keep you if you do not keep it." Raven sat on the step and closed her eyes and breathed until the fever loosened its grip enough to let her speak. She said, "The map men want is not a line on hide. It is a path under stone, and it does not open for greed." She said, "My father drew it with his life and buried it with his bones, and the river guards it. Like a mother guards a child she nearly lost." Santiago came back with a basin that had learned new colors and said, "You cannot hold here long. They will come again with more men and fewer doubts." He looked to Eli with a question that was also a statement. Eli answered by opening the iron-banded trunk and lifting the canvas roll inside. He unwrapped oilcloth and revealed rifles that smelled of purpose ammunition, that listened for orders, and a small tin that held dry coffee, as if it were the last good thing in the world. He said, "We do not stay to be noble. We move to be useful. The river is the point. The mission is a page. Pages can burn. Rivers do not." May spread the map on the scarred table and traced the 3 canyons with a nail that had known hard work. She said there are 2 ways to the understone if the stories hold. The first is a throat the land closes when it is angry. The second is a back door that only opens when the wind is from the south and the moon is thin. She looked at Raven. Raven said the wind is changing and the moon is thin. She looked at Eli. Eli said, "I have been waiting 3 years to walk towards something that matters." They packed without waste. Water skins, the canvas roll. Santiago filled a small leather bag with needles and thread and powders that stung men back to life. May took salt and a length of wire and a file. Raven took a small bundle wrapped in deerskin and tucked it inside her shirt, where the bandage lay a gift from the father who had not been forgiven by the tribe, but would not be betrayed by his daughter. Eli took his rope and his colt, and a strip of jerky he could not taste, and a coin he carried not for luck, but for memory. A small round of metal that marked the day his hands put a bottle down and did not lift it again. Before they left, Eli walked to the bell and put his palm against the metal. It was cool now. It would be hot again by noon. He did not pray. He did not know how without lying. He did something else that felt like truth. He thanked the room for its shelter and the walls for their patience and the floor for holding the weight of 3 people in a plan. He turned and found Santiago watching him with the kind of smile that made a man sit up straighter. The old doctor said, "Do not die for poetry, live for water." Eli said, "I will try." Santiago said, "Try less and choose more." They left by the rear where the mission's bones opened to scrub and shadow. They moved like a small weather system, quiet and sure drawing their own wind. Behind them, the yard lay still, except for the flies that had their own work to do and the soft settling of dust. Ahead, the land folded into the 3 canyons like a hand making a fist. The sky was a pale coin tossed too high to catch. They rode until the sun began to make everything honest by burning away the kindly lies of morning shade. May called a halt at a stand of mesquite where the ground kept a secret layer of cool. They ate without speaking. Raven slept with her hand on the deerskin bundle. Eli watched the horizon and felt something he had not felt since the day before his life went sideways. A narrow edge of peace that comes when a man's steps are pointed at the thing his heart has been circling. He did not trust it yet. He let it sit beside him like a new dog learning his scent. In the early afternoon, they saw a sign on the far ridge, a glint that might have been a mirror, or a bottle, or a man's tooth smiling at his own nastiness. May said glass. Santiago would have said the same if he had come, but he had stayed to tend and to hold the thin line between the living and the dead at a place that had once taught children to kneel and now taught them to aim. Raven said scouts. Eli said not ours. They veered into a cut no wider than a horse's chest and let the walls nibble their stirrups. The heat there was a living thing, but the shadows hid them the way a blanket hides a child who needs a breath between thunderclaps. As they waited, a snake slid from a crack and considered them with the indifference of a god. Eli tipped his hat, though he wore none a habit of politeness, to danger he had learned when he stopped pretending he could beat it by pretending it was not there. Raven watched its tongue taste the air and said the river under stone is its river too. May said then, let us be good guests. The scouts passed above without scenting them. When the last hoofbeat faded into the kind of silence that makes men confess, they eased on. The land beyond the cut rolled like a thought trying to settle. The first canyon of the three opened its mouth to them, a wide curve of stone and shadow where even the sun hesitated. Raven said the throat. Eli said, let us not test its anger. May said back door then. They turned south and the wind met them, with the shy smell of moisture from somewhere impossible. Raven smiled at nothing anyone else could see and said the moon will be thin tonight. The door will listen. Toward evening they crested a low ridge and saw a scatter of roofs to the west, a half-town drawn small against the land. A saloon sign swung on a rusted hook, and the thought of coffee and cool shade came at them with the soft violence of memory. Eli felt the tug like a hook in his ribs. May felt it too, and cut him a sideways look that said she knew more than was comfortable. Raven studied his face without pity and said, if you need coffee, we will find coffee. He said I need water and my hands to be empty of anything that lies. She nodded as if he had said nothing at all and everything important at once. They skirted the town and camped in a crease where willow roots found water with the stubborn intelligence of living things. The air tasted different there, green and promising. Raven knelt and pressed her palm to the mud and closed her eyes, and when she opened them, her fever had stepped back another pace. Eli lay on his back and watched the sky turn from brass to copper to something he could not name without sounding like a man trying to sell beauty. May cleaned her rifle and hummed a tune that had no words and did not need any. Night fell like a curtain that had been mended many times and still did its job. The moon rose thin and brave. A wind moved from the south with the smell of tin and distant rain. Raven sat up and said now. She led them toward a seam in the ground that was not there until it was a line where the earth had stitched itself and left a loose thread for those who knew where to tug. They followed her into a cleft that swallowed sound and offered a coolness that did not belong to the day they had survived. The back door had opened. The river under stone was near enough to hear if a person had the kind of hearing that comes from losing other things first. Eli felt the old fear arrive right on time and did not hate it for its punctuality. He wrapped the rope across his chest and put his hand against the wall and said to the rock what he had said to the bell. I am here to carry and not to sell. The rock did not answer. It did not need to. It was enough that it made room for them to pass. The passage narrowed until they had to turn sideways, boots scraping rock that had not felt human touch in generations. The air cooled damp with a breath that whispered of hidden streams. Raven moved first, her hand brushing stone, as if to greet old kin. May followed, rifle slung, but ready eyes restless in the dim. Eli brought up the rear, rope coiled across his shoulder, revolver loose in his palm. Every 20 steps he paused to listen, not only for enemies, but for the sound of himself checking if the old thirst stirred when darkness pressed close. It did faint as a whisper, but he counted heartbeats until the noise grew quiet. The tunnel opened into a chamber vast enough to hold silence like a lake. Water gleamed on the floor, a silver mirror broken by ripples where droplets fell from stalactites. Raven knelt and touched the pool with reverence, murmuring in her father's tongue. The river under stone, she said softly. It lives still. Eli crouched beside her and dipped his fingers, lifting coolness to his lips. It was sweeter than any whiskey had ever been, and for a moment he feared the memory of drink would win. But no, this was water that fed bone, not fire that hollowed it. He drank deep and let his breath steady. At the chamber's far side lay a mound of stones shaped by human hands. Raven unwrapped her deerskin bundle and pressed it to the mound as if returning a child to rest. My father's oath sleeps here, she whispered. May knelt too, though reverence was not her way, and began pulling stones aside. Beneath the first layer lay oilcloth, stiff with age but whole. Eli helped lift it, and when it opened, the lantern light struck iron and wood rifles, dozens of them, packed with cartridges and sealed tins. Weapons enough to outfit an army. Raven's eyes shone, not with greed, but with grief. He thought to guard us, she said, and yet these teeth bite both ways. Eli looked at the rifles and saw not protection, but echoes of fields where men had fallen nameless, where guns had spoken louder than prayers. He closed the oilcloth again. Then we choose who eats, he said. Not men like Whitfield, not Vasquez across the border. People who bleed for soil, not coin. May nodded. Then we carry what we can and hide the rest deeper. Raven's jaw tightened. No, we destroy what cannot be carried. Better ash than chains. Her voice shook, but her eyes did not. Before they could act, a scrape of boot echoed through the chamber. Eli swung the Colt up, but the figure that stepped from the shadows carried no weapon raised. It was Santiago, his hair silver in the lantern, glow face lined deeper with the road. I could not let you shoulder this alone, he said. Whitfield's men followed. They will be here before dawn. Behind him came two more shapes, Apache braves, one of them. Charlie Two Feathers scars bright on his chest. He clasped Eli's arm with the strength of remembered debts. The canyon eats those who think it is theirs, he said simply. They work quickly. Half the rifles were hidden in fissures too narrow for a man to crawl, the rest doused with oil from Santiago's pack. Raven struck flint, and the chamber flared with fire smoke curling toward the ceiling like prayers denied. The sound was muffled but certain. By the time Whitfield's scouts reached the outer cleft, flames had already claimed what could not be saved. Eli watched the fire with a strange peace, as if each crack of burning stock was another nail pulled from his past. When they emerged into the night, the moon thin above them, Whitfield himself stood on the ridge with 20 men. His face was a mask of fury lit by torchlight. You think fire robs me, he shouted. You think ash feeds nations. I'll take your river then. I'll drown you in it. He raised his rifle and the line of men followed. Eli stepped forward into the torch glow rope, uncoiling from his hand, voice steady. No, Mason, you'll take nothing but the weight of your own lies. Raven stood at his side, knife flashing. May and Santiago flanked Charlie Two Feathers and his braves forming a wall behind. The desert wind rose, carrying the scent of smoke and water. Battle waited, but so did something else, something larger than rifles or grudges. Eli felt it stir in his chest, a reminder that men can be more than what hunts them. The ridge crackled with gunfire and the canyon answered with echoes like drums. But Eli did not think of death. He thought of water running under stone, patient and eternal, waiting for those who chose to guard rather than hoard. He thought of Raven's eyes steady in the firelight, of May's laugh, when danger dared her, of Santiago's tired hands, still strong enough to heal. He thought for the first time in years of a future worth reaching for. And then he moved quick and sure into the storm that would decide it. The ridge exploded with noise, torches swaying as shots cracked through the dark. Sparks leapt from stone, where bullets struck the air, thick with smoke and dust. Eli dropped low rope in one hand, revolver in the other. Raven slipped to his flank, knives, ready her shadow, dancing like another fighter made of flame. May fired clean and hard, each shot pushing men back from the narrow mouth of the canyon. Santiago worked behind them, steady as a clock, reloading rifles, passing water, barking sharp orders that cut through the chaos sharper than bullets. Whitfield's men pressed forward, not in a wave but in jagged thrusts, every torch revealing faces too stubborn to turn back. Eli's revolver spoke 3 times, each word final. He felt the recoil run up his arm like an old friend, reminding him of debts unpaid. His rope whistled once, snagging a rider's wrist, dragging him down hard where Charlie Two Feathers finished the lesson with a war club swung like thunder. Raven darted past Eli, a streak of dark and steel, and one of Whitfield's best dropped without time to cry out. Her wound tore at her side, but she moved as if pain itself obeyed her. Whitfield shouted, voice ragged. The river's ours, the desert bows to coin. He raised his rifle to fire at Raven, but Eli was faster. His shot slammed into the wood of Whitfield's stock, splintering it, knocking the weapon wide. The desert bows to no one. Eli called back, his voice calm against the storm. It only buries fools. The fighting grew close and brutal. No distance for careful aim, only fists, knives, gun butts, cracking bone. May swung her rifle like an axe when cartridges ran thin, dropping a man who had thought her cornered. Santiago braced his shotgun on a rock, fired both barrels into the push of men, then calmly reloaded as if stitching a wound. Charlie Two Feathers and his braves cut through the enemy line with the silent fury of men who carried ancestors on their shoulders. The tide shifted. Whitfield's men faltered, torches dropping into the dust. Fear crept where greed had stood. Some ran scattering into the desert, their shouts fading into the dark. But Whitfield himself would not yield. He staggered forward, blood streaking his temple pistol in his fist, eyes burning with a madness that no promise could quench. He locked on Eli and bared his teeth. "You stole my command, my fortune, my name. I'll take yours." Eli stepped out into the open ground, lowering his rope but keeping his Colt ready. "You lost your command when you sold your men," he said evenly. "You lost your fortune when you chased silver instead of water. And you lost your name when you carved it out of betrayal." The two men stood, history boiling between them, the night holding its breath. Whitfield raised his pistol. Eli's revolver barked first. The shot struck Whitfield's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. His pistol clattered away, fire dying in his eyes, though his rage still burned on his tongue. "Finish it," he spat. "Be the killer you were made." Eli stood over him, breathing hard, revolver aimed steady. Then he shook his head. "No, I'm not your mirror anymore." He stepped back, holstered his gun, and let the silence settle. Whitfield lay in the dirt, clutching his wound, fury collapsing into something small, almost pitiful. Charlie Two Feathers moved forward, binding him with rawhide. "He lives," the Comanche said, "but he will not walk proud again." The ridge grew quiet. Smoke drifted upward, torches dying to embers. Raven leaned on a stone, blood soaking her bandage, but her smile was sharp. "You chose," she said softly, "not to run, not to drink, not to kill. You chose." Eli met her gaze, chest heaving, and for the first time in years he felt lighter, as if the desert itself had returned, a piece of him he thought lost forever. They gathered what remained wounded, tended by Santiago's hands, weapons hidden deeper. Where greed could not find them, water carried carefully in skins. May looked to the horizon where dawn's pale fire licked the edge of the world. "Sun's coming," she said. "We bought another day." Charlie Two Feathers nodded. "Enough," he replied. "And maybe enough for our children, too." Eli helped Raven to her feet, steadying her when her strength faltered. She leaned against him without shame. Together they looked east, where light crept slow but sure across the desert. "The river under stone flows still," Raven whispered. Eli squeezed her hand. "And so do we." The ridge behind them smoldered in silence, smoke threads curling upward like memories refusing to rest. Eli and Raven rode at the front of the small column, her body leaning faintly against him, when her strength faltered, his hand steady on the reins. May rode just behind, eyes sharp on every shadow, as if the fight might leap out of the rocks again. Santiago brought up the rear with Charlie Two Feathers and his braves, the old doctor's gaze alternating between the wounded and the horizon. They moved slow, not because the desert was gentler, but because they had learned haste feeds ambush, while patience feeds survival. By midday, the land stretched flat and wide, a table set with nothing but heat. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the rasp of hooves and the faint rattle of gear. Raven's fever spiked her skin hot against Eli's arm. He offered her water, tilting the skin carefully, and she drank just enough to wet her throat. "You should rest," he said, voice low. She shook her head once. "Rest when we reach shade. Not here. Never here." He did not argue. He had lived long enough in deserts to know rest without cover was a lie men told themselves before they died. Toward evening, they reached a shallow arroyo where willows clawed at the soil roots, stubborn in their thirst. There they made camp. May scouted the perimeter, quiet as dusk. Charlie's braves dug shallow pits for watchfires, shielding the glow with stone. Santiago boiled water and steeped herbs in it, the smell sharp and earthy. Raven lay back on a blanket, eyes half closed, murmuring words in Apache that none of the others understood, but all respected. Eli sat close, revolver across his knees, watching her chest rise and fall, with a rhythm that worried him more than bullets had. "Infection," stubborn Santiago muttered, pressing a hand to her wound. "But she's stronger than it is. I'll keep her anchored." He poured the herbal brew carefully between her lips, and Raven swallowed without waking. Eli caught the doctor's glance. "Don't let her slip," Eli said. Santiago's expression softened for once. "You think I don't know what it's like to hold on to someone who's halfway gone? I'll fight harder than you." Night fell cool. The stars stretched endless sharp against the black. Eli lay awake back against a rock rope coiled beside him, unable to let his mind ease. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Whitfield's face bloodied, beaten but still breathing. He wondered if sparing that life had been mercy or mistake. Raven stirred once, whispering his name without meaning to, and his hand found hers in the dark. He held it until her trembling eased. Before dawn, May returned from watch with news. "Scouts," she said. "3, maybe 4? Keeping distance. Not sure if Whitfield's strays or fresh hunters. Either way, they're watching." Eli rubbed a hand over his jaw, gritty with dust and exhaustion. "They'll wait for us to move. Pick a place that suits them." May spat into the dirt. "Then we don't give them the choice. We choose the ground." At first light, they set out again, riding deeper into the hills where stone teeth rose from the sand like the ruins of giants. Raven, awake but weak, insisted on leading them, with gestures pointing toward paths hidden by thorn and shadow. "Father showed me once," she said through clenched teeth. "Safe way east. Canyon swallows riders who don't know it." Her voice was thin but sure. Eli trusted it more than any map. By midday, they reached a box canyon with walls carved, smooth by centuries of wind. It offered water pulled at its heart, shaded by cottonwoods that whispered even in still air. "Good place," Charlie said, dismounting. "Spirits approve." May eyed the ridges warily. Spirits don't shoot, but yes, better than flat land. As they settled, Raven leaned against Eli, her strength nearly gone. "You chose not to kill him," she whispered. "That choice will chase us." Eli met her gaze, weary but steady. "Maybe, but I'm done letting the past tell me who I am." Raven studied him, then nodded faintly. "Then I'll chase it with you." The others built small fires, cooked what little they carried. Laughter rose for the first time in days, brittle but real. May teased Charlie about his silence, and he answered with a rare smile. Santiago told a story about stitching wounds by lantern light during the war, his gruff voice softening when he spoke of men who lived because someone refused to give up on them. Eli sat apart with Raven, watching the flames paint her face. She looked fragile, yet her eyes still burned with the stubborn fire of someone who had been cast out and yet refused to vanish. He thought of himself 3 years sober, 3 years running, never sure if he deserved to stop. Now, with her hand in his, the idea of staying somewhere did not feel like surrender. It felt like beginning. When the fire burned low and the others slept, Raven spoke again, voice barely more than breath. "You think the river under stone will forgive us for burning the rifles?" Eli shook his head slowly. "Rivers don't forgive. They just keep flowing. It's us who have to forgive ourselves." Her fingers tightened weakly around his. "Then promise me, Eli. Promise we'll keep walking toward water, not fire." He looked at her, at the woman fate had thrown into his path in a canyon full of bullets, and answered without hesitation. "I promise." Above them, the stars wheeled slow, ancient and indifferent, yet somehow kind enough to grant them that small vow. Dawn found them restless. The canyon that had cradled them in shade now felt like a trap with its high walls and single throat of an exit. Eli rose before the others, checked the cartridges in his Colt, and walked the rim of cottonwoods. The water pooled at the canyon's heart reflected the sky so perfectly it seemed like a second heaven, yet he could not shake the sense that eyes watched from beyond the ridges. May joined him, rifle over her shoulder, hair pulled back, rough. "Scouts again," she said, nodding toward faint scuffs in the dust leading east. "They didn't come close, but they know we're here." "Whitfield's strays," Eli muttered. "Wolves without a pack are still wolves." Raven stirred awake on the blanket where Santiago had kept her through the night. She pushed herself upright, despite the fever still shadowing her face. "Then we move," she said firmly. "Wolves hunt easy prey. We won't be easy." Her voice carried the same stubborn music that had brought her this far, wounded yet unbroken. They broke camp quickly. Charlie, 2 feathers in his braves, took the lead, moving like ghosts through the stone teeth of the desert. Eli and Raven followed her, weight light against his side, when the trail narrowed. His rope coiled across his chest like a badge he had not asked for, but now carried with pride. May rode flank, scanning ridges with sharp eyes. Santiago brought up the rear mule, packed with what little medicine and powder remained. By midday, the land opened into a wide basin scattered with boulders that looked too deliberately placed to be natural. Eli felt the skin between his shoulders tighten. Ambush ground, he said. Too many places to hide. Charlie nodded, unslinging his bow. They wait. The first shot cracked from the rocks above, splintering a cottonwood branch near Raven's head. Instinct dropped everyone to the ground. A second volley followed, echoing across the basin. May fired back toward the ridge, forcing one rifleman to duck. Santiago pulled Raven behind a boulder, pressing her wound again, cursing under his breath. Eli rose just enough to scan the ridge. Half a dozen men, ragged but determined faces, sunburnt with desperation. Not Whitfield's disciplined killers, but scavengers chasing the rumor of weapons and maps. Their leader called out, voice raw, hand over the woman and the map, and maybe you walk away. Raven's laugh was sharp despite her weakness. Map is ash. Rifles are ash. You chase ghosts. The men hesitated, mutters carrying among them. They hadn't expected defiance. Eli seized the moment, standing tall in the open, revolver raised. You come for silver, he shouted, but all you'll find is lead. Then he fired his shot, taking the leader square in the chest. The echo rolled like thunder and the fight began. Bullets screamed. Dust rose in choking clouds. May picked targets with ruthless calm, each shot dropping a man or driving him from his perch. Charlie and his braves circled wide, climbing unseen paths to strike from behind. Eli moved from rock to rock, rope in hand, until he closed with one of the ambushers. The man lunged with a knife, but Eli's loop snapped tight around his wrist, yanking him off balance. One swift strike of the Colt's butt ended the struggle. Raven, though weak, refused to cower. She crawled to a fallen rifle, braced it against a stone, and fired once, her shot grazing another man's thigh, sending him howling from the ridge. Santiago pulled her back with a growl. Don't tear the stitches, girl. She answered only with a grim smile. The tide turned when Charlie's braves struck from behind, war cries cutting through the basin like lightning splitting sky. The ambushers, trapped between fire ahead and fury behind, broke. Some fled into the desert, throwing down rifles in their haste. 2 were dragged down and bound. The rest lay still among the stones. Silence followed, sharp and sudden. Eli stood breathing hard, sweat and dust streaking his face. He looked down at the man he'd roped now, groaning in the dirt, and felt no triumph. Just the hollow weight of necessity. Raven touched his arm, her hand trembling but steady in its intent. You kept the promise, she said softly. Toward water, not fire. You fought to protect, not to burn. Santiago bound the wounded, both friend and foe, his gruffness hiding the care in his hands. May kicked dust from her boots, muttering, that won't be the last pack sniffing after us. Charlie Two Feathers agreed. Word spreads faster than wind. We must choose where we stand next. Eli gazed east, where the land shimmered in heat. Beyond those ridges lay redemption, the town where his past had first come back to haunt him, and where unfinished reckonings still waited. He holstered his Colt and tightened the rope across his shoulder. Then we stand where it matters, he said. Not here, not running anymore. In redemption. Raven leaned heavier against him, her eyes closing briefly. Then we finish what began, she whispered. And so they set out again, weary but unbroken, carrying fire in their scars, and water in their hope, the desert stretching ahead like a trial that might yet make them whole. Redemption rose out of the heat like a mirage, wooden facades wavering in the shimmer of noon. Eli reined in at the ridge above town, Raven leaning against him, her breath steady but thin. May narrowed her eyes at the main street below, where townsfolk moved with the restless pace of people who had heard whispers but not yet seen the storm behind them. Santiago adjusted his hat, muttering, place smells like old lies. Charlie Two Feathers said nothing, but his hand brushed the eagle feather at his braid, as if calling old spirits to walk with them. They entered the town slow, not hiding, but not flaunting either. Every step of the horses rang against dry boards like questions. Eyes followed them, storefront windows, saloon doors, a child clutching his mother's skirt. Eli saw the stares aimed at Raven, sharp with suspicion and fear. He rode taller, making it plain she was under his protection. At the sheriff's office, William Blackwood stepped out, his badge catching the sun, his smile stretched too thin. Morgan, he drawled. Didn't expect to see you breathing. His eyes flicked to Raven, lingered, then hardened. Or her. We need to talk, Eli said, dismounting. Inside, the air was stale with whiskey. Eli laid it out plain. Whitfield captured, his men scattered, the weapons cache destroyed. Blackwood listened, but his gaze kept sliding to Raven, as if the truth itself sat in her eyes and not in Eli's words. When Eli finished, silence stretched. Then Blackwood leaned back in his chair, smile creeping again. "You did half my work, Morgan. Now hand over the woman and the map. I'll take it from here." Raven's hand went to her side, not for pain, but for the small bundle she had carried since her father's death. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing nothing but ashes bound in cloth. She set it on Blackwood's desk. "Map is gone," she said. "What mattered is already protected." Blackwood's face twisted, mask slipping. "You think you can walk into my town, burn what could have made us kings, and leave me scraps?" His hand hovered near his holster. The room held its breath. Eli stepped forward, voice calm but heavy. "William, you were a soldier once. You swore an oath. Break it now and you'll answer not just to me, but to every man you betrayed." Before Blackwood could move, the door banged open. Deputy marshals entered, rifles ready, summoned by Santiago's quiet messages days before. Charlie Two Feathers stepped in behind them, flanked by his braves. The sheriff's eyes darted, calculating, but the math no longer worked. Slowly he raised his hands. The marshals moved in, the steel snapping around his wrists. "Blackwood, you're under arrest," one marshal said. "For conspiracy, treason, and more besides." Blackwood spat at the floor, his words sour. "Morgan, you'll die poor. Honor doesn't buy land." Eli met his gaze. "No, but it buys sleep." Outside, the town stirred with murmurs as Blackwood was led away. The tension cracked like dry wood, and life resumed, if uneasily. Eli helped Raven down from her horse. She winced but stood tall, eyes sweeping the street that had once looked at her as an enemy. Some still glared, but others watched with something closer to respect. They took rooms at the Frontier Hotel, though Eli refused the saloon's lure. Instead, he sat on the porch that evening, watching the sun lower itself into the desert. Raven joined him, her steps slower but surer than days past. She stood beside him a long while before speaking. "You stayed true," she said softly. "To yourself, to me." Eli looked out at the horizon, where smoke from the burned cache no longer marked the sky. "I've run from everything. Whiskey, ghosts, my own name. But maybe running brought me here." He turned to her, eyes steady. "To something worth stopping for." Her fingers brushed his, hesitant at first, then firm. "The river under stone still flows," she whispered. "And so do we." Weeks passed. Santiago set up a small practice on the edge of town, patching ranch hands and travelers. May took to running supplies between outposts, her laugh carrying through dusty streets. Charlie Two Feathers and his braves returned to their people, but not before marking Eli with the words of one who had kept faith. Eli built a cabin just beyond Redemption, close enough to ride in, but far enough to breathe. He shaped its walls with his own hands, each board a statement that he was done drifting. Raven planted herbs by the door, their green defiant against the desert. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch, watching the horizon burn gold and crimson, their silence filled with more than words could carry. One night, a rattlesnake coiled near the steps, its rattle sharp in the dusk. Eli reached for his rope out of habit, but Raven stopped him, smiling faintly. "Not all snakes are danger," she said. "Some are warnings, reminders." They watched the creature slide away into the scrub, leaving behind nothing but the whisper of its passing. Eli breathed deep, the desert air heavy but clean. For the first time in years, he felt no weight pressing him down. No bottle pulling at his hand, no past clawing at his back. Just the present, sharp and alive, with Raven beside him, and tomorrow waiting like water under stone, hidden, eternal, and theirs to find.